So good evening and welcome on behalf of the board and staff of the Wende Museum of the Cold War here in Culver City, California. I'm Tom Backer, a member of the Wende's board. Tonight marks the culmination of a 5-year journey the museum has taken with the Aga Khan Music Program and the Aga Khan Western Council of the United States. The journey began with talks between myself and Dr. Shaheen Kasimlaka and includes a trip the museum's director, Dr. Justin Jampel, and I made to Toronto in 2017 to meet with our colleagues and to visit the Aga Khan Museum there and the worship center next door. We subsequently developed a partnership between our institutions for jointly presenting programs, of which tonight's is the first and hopefully of many to come. Details about this evening are on the program that was attached with your Zoom confirmation and link. I'll shortly turn over the evening to the Wende's Chief Curator, Dr. Yus Segal, but first I would like to thank our partners on the Aga Khan side, particularly Saraya Ali, Karim Gawani, and Nazim Karim, who worked alongside us to make this evening possible. Also thanks to our speakers for tonight, Professors Ted Levin and Munir Bekin, and Firuz Nishanova of the Aga Khan Music Program. And thanks to our dedicated team at the Wende, Dr. Segal, Anna Rose Canzano, and Chloe Vinegar. Finally, thanks to Ian Price, who is with us tonight, for sharing musical instruments in his extensive private collection presented in the Wende's virtual exhibition that opened today. There's a link on your Zoom confirmation to visit this exhibition to see and read about and hear the instruments from Central Asia that Mr. Price is sharing with us. I will end with one more special thanks to Dr. Shaheen Kasimlaka, my longtime friend and colleague, who has been instrumental in creating the Wende Aga Khan partnership. Shaheen's day job is Director of Strategic Partnerships for the Conrad Hilton Foundation, but she's also a lifelong volunteer for the Aga Khan's numerous charities, and she will welcome us on behalf of the Aga Khan Music Program and the Western Council of the United States. Shaheen, it's been a winding road to get to tonight. I'm happy to have been on that road with you, and I'm looking forward to the concert and discussion that will shortly follow. Thank you, and Shaheen, over to you.
Thank you, Tom, for that really very warm introduction and kind words for myself and the Aga Khan Council. We're so delighted to have the opportunity this evening. And just to echo your sentiments, hopefully this is not the culmination of our long collaboration, but just the beginning of a long-term partnership. And a special thanks to you and Justin Jampel and the Wende Museum for making this international collaboration possible. Good evening to our esteemed audience. Thank you for joining us tonight for this exciting concert and discussion. I am honored to share a few remarks on behalf of the Aga Khan Council and the Ismaili community. While we are relative new arrivals in North America, the Ismailis are a diverse global community encompassing numerous cultures and languages. We have a 1400-year history and presence in more than 25 countries. We are united by a common faith and guided by our spiritual leader, His Highness the Aga Khan, who is fully committed to broadening intellectual horizons and fostering an appreciation of pluralism through the arts. For centuries, music and devotional literature have been an integral part of our traditions. Many Ismailis live in Central Asia, some of the regions under the former Soviet Union. And in speaking with Tom and Justin, we thought music would be a great way to introduce this part of the world to many who may not be familiar with its rich culture and history. You have a whole evening ahead to learn more about this, but allow me to quote His Highness the Aga Khan, who said, "Music traditionally served not only as entertainment, but as a way to reinforce social and moral values. And musicians provided models of exemplary leadership. Whether bringing listeners closer to God, sustaining cultural memory through epic tales, or strengthening the bonds of community through festivity and celebration, Musicians have been central to social life, end quote. At a time when strengthening the values of diversity and pluralism is a worldwide priority, music transcends language and can help connect communities. This is our hope for tonight's program, that it entertains as well as informs, and ultimately builds understanding and forges new bonds across our common humanity. Please enjoy the program. And now over to you, Sigal, Chief Curator at the Wende Museum.
Thank you very much, Shaheen, for your beautiful words. And thank you, Tom. Wende from Wende Museum is a German word, and it means transformation or change. It is used to describe the events leading up to the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. But for us at the museum, it references all processes of change, including the political and cultural undercurrents that helped transform history. Our collection of Soviet items ranges from official artwork and objects of everyday life to KGB facial recognition materials, private demobilization scrapbooks, Soviet Jewish personal documents, and the world's largest collection of Soviet hippie materials. Last week, we had a panel discussion with 5 former Soviet rock musicians checking in from Moscow, as well as an interview with the Kazakh American opera singer and performance artist Timur Bekbosunov about monumental art in Almaty and its many references to local myth, history, and culture in Kazakhstan. Official and unofficial, central and regional aspects of Soviet culture are very much part of our mission. Therefore, we are very excited to partner tonight with the Aga Khan Music Program and the Aga Khan Council of the Western United States for this special concert. History is never static. Authoritarian regimes may suppress creativity and try to keep culture and society in check, but the human spirit can never be absolutely controlled. Central Asian musical traditions are a case in point. Regional culture might have been dismissed as bourgeois decadent or tolerated as local folklore, but the torch was never extinguished, and what lingers under the surface can all of a sudden reappear with a vengeance once the opportunity arises. Today, we are celebrating a living tradition that offers joy, meaning, and inspiration, not only to people from a specific culture or region, but to people all over the world, and that obviously includes Culver City. Before we start with our musical fragments, we are going to set the stage with 2 introductory presentations by Farouz Nishanova, Director of the Aga Khan Music Program and Aga Khan Music Awards, and Ted Levin, ethnomusicologist and professor of music at Dartmouth College. You can find their short bios in the program. Farouz has her introduction pre-recorded, and Ted will join us live. But now over to Farouz for her introduction.
What happened back in late 90s and early 2000 is that AKDN as a network made a commitment to the region of Central Asia. And at the same time, a very different thing happened many miles away, many kilometers away in the United States, when a wonderful musician and cello player, Yo-Yo Ma, launched what later became known as the Silk Road Project. And as part of that, created the Silk Road Ensemble that united musicians and composers from all the countries that formed this historic notion of the Silk Route. His Highness and AKDN became partners in that process. And His Highness's wish was to see artists and composers from Central Asia and Afghanistan as equal participants in the creative process that was then to be known, later to be known as the Silk Road Ensemble, and the repertoire, the new repertoire, the new body of music that was being created. And so our journey into this world started with a discovery that was really unpleasant, because we had to admit to ourselves that the artists from Central Asia, young composers from Central Asia, were simply unable to create the same quality of musical works that came very easily to a composer from China or India or Iran. And the first question that I asked myself, that the experts asked ourselves, is why? And the reason became apparent once we started understanding what was the process for arts and music education, because there was a complete breakdown in the process of teaching the classical indigenous music of the region for a multitude of reasons. Prime among them being the 70 plus years of the Soviet rule in the region. Several decades later, there were two generations that had very little connection to their own artistic roots, to their own musical and artistic expression of the land that their grandparents grew up with. And so when you don't have a foundation on which, an education, of course, is a foundation on which pretty much anything can be built. But when that is broken and when that is absent, that means that the next step, the creative step, becomes impossible. So that's when the music program really was created. We had, on the one hand, apparent breakdown in the music and arts education when it came to traditional music. And on the other hand, we had the commitment to the region that AKDN made. And then the cultural development wing could not immediately fulfill. So when the music program, at that point, Music Initiative, was created, it was really first and foremost arts and music education program. We had to go into the regions, find those who still had ability, knowledge, and desire to share their craft and to pass it on to the next generation of both artists and audiences. We then had to give them the most basic financial and administrative needs to enable them to teach. We then had to ensure that this is the kind of art form that became recognized and respected again, not only in their home countries, but also abroad, which meant creation of the performance program on top of the education program. We then began producing this music, so we became a very unlikely kind of music producers and partners. And then a few years into this, realized that we could only preserve the tradition and help the tradition in a very limited way if we continuously wrapped it in this preservation blanket. But to really help it grow, it had to be developed, not only preserved. And that, of course, could not happen in a vacuum. So we had to then connect this newly created artistic communities that we were nurturing in Central Asia. We had to connect them with the arts communities and musicians and creators in the regions and countries that they always shared historic connections with, but the connections that were no longer active. So we became the promoters of East-East fusion and East-East music creations, which is something that we continue to do today.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ted Levin, and it's been my privilege to serve as senior advisor to the Aga Khan Music Program since its founding in 2000, working together with Feiruz Nishinova. I studied music in Soviet Uzbekistan in the late 1970s, so I saw the Cold War up close from the other side. There were two realities. The first was the public face of the Soviet Union that became a cliché in the West, a gray, cold, and homogeneous place with unsmiling people who stood in line for hours to buy the basic necessities of life. The second reality was the private lives of people that flourished thanks to the informal networks of mutual support that arose to fill the social and spiritual vacuum of what they called Soviet reality. Music and other forms of artistic creativity could exist and to an extent flourish in these private spaces. And thus, while the official face of musical traditions in Central Asia reflected Soviet cultural policies that favored the adoption of European and Russian musical forms and templates, strands of traditions survived, transmitted through informal networks outside the official music education system. These were the strands that the Aga Khan Music Program sought out when we began our work in Central Asia. The musical excerpts in the film you'll see in a moment represent some of these strands, which have been cultivated and developed by musicians we've sought out and whose work we've supported and presented. The first of these musicians that you'll see in the film is Sirajuddin Jurayev. He's an amazing stringed instrument player from northern Tajikistan who has become not only one of Tajikistan's leading performers, but also a highly original composer of what you could call neo-traditional music. And what you'll hear in the film is one of his compositions, Mehan. Sirajuddin is followed by a group. By the way, Sirajuddin is accompanied by another wonderful musician. He's from Uzbekistan, but he now lives in Sacramento, California, Abbas Qasimov. He's a percussionist, and he'll be playing the frame drum. Sirajuddin is followed by a group called Bardic Divas, which the Aga Khan Music Program put together, and which consists of 3 women from Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan who perform music that was once the exclusive province of men. Then there's Alim Qasimov from Azerbaijan, whom the New York Times music critic John Parelis called one of the greatest singers in the world, and justifiably so. Together with his daughter Fargana, Alim sings the Sufi-inspired classical Mugam music of Azerbaijan. At the end of the film, you'll see the Badakhshan Ensemble, a group from the Pamir Mountains of Tajikistan whose music has deep roots in the traditions of Ismaili spirituality that have existed in Badakhshan for 1,000 years. We also included short performance by a young group of musicians from Kyrgyzstan who are graduates of a music education program that the Aga Khan Music Program has supported there since 2003, called Center Ustad Shakert, which means master disciple. Excuse me. We've also included a couple of short videos that provide a social context for this music and show the work of the Aga Khan Music Program. The first of these videos features a project that we supported in Tajikistan for 13 years called Academy of Maqam, which trained a new generation of music leaders in that country. The second shows preparations for the Navruz holiday as it's celebrated in Samarkand, Uzbekistan, marking the arrival of spring on March 21st. And finally, a glimpse at a countrywide elementary school music education program that we support in Kyrgyzstan that helps Kyrgyz school children reclaim their cultural identity. I hope that you enjoy the film, which lasts 34 minutes.
طوری که معلوم است بخارا شهری مرکزی آسیای میانه بود و تمام عالمان، نوازندگان، سرایندگان، شاعران ایران در محض در همین شهر جمع آمدند. در بخارا در نتیجه ایجادیات موسیقی هنری، ایجادیات بسته‌کاران موسیقی ششمکان شکل یافته است. موسیقی مقام این برای اشرافیان بود. مثلا موسیقی فقط برای دربارانی که در خلق هم میخواند. مثلا موسیقی توی ما بودن. در هر مرکب البته قسمت پارچه خوانده میشده بود. مراسم توی ها است که همین مقام ها خوانده برای خلق معقول بود. تو با امروز این سال است که ما رو اکادمی ششمکان فعالیت داریم و امروز ما چیکار کرده ایم؟ ما تنها مقام را اجرا میکنیم، لیکن به معنی آن با ایجاد ششمکان قرار میدیم. برای اون هم اکادمی به خاطر همین تأسیس شد که هنرمندای بهترین رو جمع کنیم در اینجا. همه اساسهای ششمکان، اساسهای پرده ششمکان که در تمام است خوب نکنیم. هنگامی که به نزد استاد میامد مراجعت میکرد که من میخوام آوازخوان شود، من خوانخوان شوم، استاد و شاگرد دایره رو میداد. اتحاد دایره رو میداد. علم عروض امکانیت می‌دهد با دانستن وزن شعر در این یا آن اصول موسیقی ایجاد کنند. مثل در عرفان ما می‌بینیم چندین زینه‌هایی دارن که باید به حق رسند. یعنی در همون کمپوزیسیونی که ما داریم موسیقی مثلا سرخط یا خط دو مصرع اوج و فراوت، یعنی این هم مثل رسیدن به حق و مقصد خودی آنها است. دو مقام رو با اسپرانتوی اکادمی آماده کردیم، مقام سیگا و مقام راست. در دوام 100 سال تقریبا است که مقام به طریق اصلی خیش سلسله همچون سیکل کامل شد.
Gözümün yaşı ay destam ağzım gözümün yaşı ay namazım
That was very impressive. We will use the last 20 minutes or so of this program for a conversation with Ted Levin and with Meneer Bacon, professor of world music theory and composition at UCLA. And again, you can find their short bios in the program. Meneer, can I start with you? The first film fragment we saw was called Revitalizing Shash Machom. And can you tell us a little bit about the concept of Macham and how it plays out in the Central Asian context?
Thank you very much. First of all, I'm really grateful to the organizers of this wonderful event, and it's a distinct honor to be on the same panel with you and Professor Ted Levin. It's a very good question. I think we see this concept, this word all over Central Asia. I mean, first of all, the beauty and the power of this music is really overwhelming. As soon as you know, I'm still trying to sort of like calm down a little bit from this experience. It's really beautiful. Just like Shash Maqam, many of the musical traditions in Central Asia are based on a theoretical concept. So theory is really important. So when I say theory though, I don't mean an area of study separate from the performance practice, but something that is an integral part of this tradition, both in its performance and education. So this is an ancient concept, and we encounter different terms to explain different aspects of it. So what is maqam then? So to understand that, I think it's important to talk about composition, musical composition a little bit, I think. So, you know, musicians, composers, scholars came up with various definitions of musical composition, but one of the most interesting ones that I have encountered is by an American avant-garde composer, Stuart Sanders Smith. He says, composition is the reorganization of musical memories. So when we think about the word composition in the Western context, we think about something sort of like, you know, a piece of paper written on it. In some way it is fixed, but when I use the term composition, I'm talking about, yes, pre-composed pieces, maybe written, maybe in the collective memory, but I also include improvisation. So improvisation actually is not performed without any rules, right? So that the same rules actually govern the improvisations, except, you know, they are not written down or they are not fixed, but it's the same process of generating music. Perhaps we can call it generating music. I'm gonna back up even a little more like before we actually jump onto the maqam concept. You know, there's a concept called algorithmic composition, like a computer-aided composition. You know, I think David Cope and some of the other composers came up with, which is they actually feed or upload the rules of composition into various computer programs and software, and the computer comes up with a properly stylistic composition based on those rules. And so the computer actually composes music. And sometimes I play for my students and they are flabbergasted. They can, you know, computer, you know, compose this, you know, what's going on? Are we losing the job? But so, you know, it's not new though. If you look at the concept of mode in the West, like, you know, when you think about, you know, Western music history, 16th century Italy, for example, you have, again, a set of rules to come up with music, right? You know, again, theory is really important. If you study modal counterpoint or strict counterpoint and write an original music based on those rules, your original music will sound like Palestrina, for example, like a 16th century Italian composer. Or if you use the rules of free counterpoint, your composition will sound like J.S. Bach. You know, if you obey all of the rules, right? So the question then becomes, what are the rules of music generating in Central Asia? Right? Then theory becomes really important, and that theory can be found in the maqam. You know, if there are a number of maqams telling you specific set of rules to follow by the musicians and improvisers, composers, and that's how it is. If you look at the history of music theory in the Middle East and Central Asia, they start with translating works by ancient Greek scholars like, you know, Pythagoras, Plato, Aristotle, you know, all these, you know, people, But one of the most important accomplishments, I guess, they established music as a field of study along with mathematics, philosophy, astronomy. And if you look at those early treatises coming from the early centuries of the Islamic sort of like a history, what you see is the study of tuning systems, melodic modes, the maqams, and the rhythmic modes. So the contemporary scholars, I think, are really important in this case today when we look at the maqam. Scholars like Harold Powers, Joseph Paholczyk, Margaret Caton, Bruno Nettle, Gültekin Oransay, Carl Signal, Jürgen Elsner, for example, his work with the International Council for Traditional Music Study Group on maqam, they really provide like pieces of a very complex puzzle about what maqam is. So I would say maqam, in the light of all these things that I hopefully sort of like, set it up, maqam is a set of compositional rules by which, a musician can generate music properly.
Right. Thank you very much for this elaboration. And would you say that all the musical fragments we just heard are informed by maqam?
I would say like some of them are more directly, I think, created by the rules of various sort of like, maqam concepts. And some of them are maybe more intuitive than more systematic.
Right. Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
My
Ted,
pleasure.
I have a question for you. Farouz already indicated in her introduction that the Soviet authorities and their impact on the rupture of musical traditions had a huge impact on these traditions. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? What was the impact of 70 years of Soviet rule for the kind of music we just heard?
Well, the kind of music you just heard was actually the result of recovering from the impact of 70 years.
Right.
These were the musicians that we found. I found a number of those myself. People I met when I was a student in the Tashkent Conservatory in the 1970s. We've stayed friends for 45 years. Others that I've met along the way. But what we helped them do, which you just witnessed, was really to reconstruct the spiritual roots of these traditions. This would never have been possible to have a concert like this in the Soviet Union, in the Soviet era. You wouldn't have had this kind of music being performed. It would have been completely suppressed, outlawed, prohibited.
I see. Yeah.
So what was performed, as I said in my little introduction, there were really two realities. There was the official cultural life, which took place in these very splendid palaces of culture, houses of culture, as they called them in Russian. They put a lot of money into culture. We could envy the budget that they spent in that country on culture. I wish we had that in our country, frankly.
Right.
But that music that was performed there was, the people who performed it were highly trained. They were rigorously disciplined. They were outstanding performers, but they had lost the contact with the spiritual roots, the sacred nature, because maqam is not only, it is, as Professor Beken said, yes, it's very much based on the kind of theory he spoke about, but it's also based, it's very closely linked with Sufism. It's the expression of Sufi philosophy, and that's the part that was not allowed. So, this kind of music was performed, but in a very arid way, by kind of official folk troops, smiling, choreographed, playing with precision, but frankly without a lot of spirit.
I see. And how did the Aga Khan Music Program help to revitalize that spiritual tradition?
Well, I think our job was really to find musicians who were, I always have thought of them as sort of musical archaeologists. These were people who had the ambition themselves to go back to their roots, to go back to the origins of this music, as Abdulwali Abdurrashidov, the Shash Maqam player in that little film, He said, Shash Makam hasn't been performed this way for 100 years. And what he meant was during the Soviet era, it wasn't performed that way. And so he, through his research and through his intuition, Munir spoke about intuition. That's very important. These people that we worked with had a kind of combination of intuition and skills, you know, talent to do this kind of digging, archaeology. Some of this music had really just gone extinct. You know, the instruments no longer existed. They had to rebuild them based on you know, photos or objects in museums. So it was a very painstaking process, you know, that we began in 2000 and that's still going on today.
I see. Thank you. So Munir, you spoke about compositional rules, but also about the aspect of improvisation. I wonder, for the musical performers, like the ones we just saw, how do they find the balance between rules and freedom in their music?
That's an excellent question. When you think about these contexts, I think there's a balance between spirituality and you know, music making. There's a direct connection, and we see sort of similarities with other suite forms across the region and all the way to you know, northwest Africa, all the way to Morocco, and some scholars actually made comparisons between Central Asian traditions and, you know, faraway places. What we see actually is one of the most sort of like widespread concept is this suite form. So what happens is that you know, when you look at the, you know, Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, places like that, you see the shash makam is performed as a suite. And the same way, you know, similar to Iran, sort of like, you know, where you have the dastgah system. And if you go all the way to Morocco, you will see the nuba or Turkey and fasil. And again, you know, among the Mevlevis, you have the ayin. You know, all of those things are, they provide a formal structure, you know, for these musics to be performed. And they all come from a fixed body of repertoire. Like, you know, if you, shash makam is a suite form, yes, but also it indicates a large body of musical compositions, fixed compositions, or loose skeleton, sort of like, you know, framework of improvisations. The same thing is true for the Eastern Turkestan in China, in the Xinjiang, among the Uyghur people. You have the Onike Makam tradition, where you have the repertoire and all these, you know, suites based on different makams. So I think I want to also a little bit follow up what Professor Levin was talking about, is that, and I think what they were able to capture in these recordings that I could see is the virtuosity. And when I say virtuosity, I don't mean the speed and, you know, like the Western concept of maybe a false concept of virtuosity, but not just that, but also the accuracy according to these rules, but really complex, a rich set of rules, like rhythmic and intonational perfection, but also the repertoire, right? You know, repertoire of individual compositions, as well as maybe the repertoire of vocabulary of stylistic ornamentations, improvised ornamentations, and maybe other musical gestures. So, you know, without the sort of like an unacceptable musical accent or maybe musical mispronunciation because of this gap in the middle, that was captured like before that gap, well, however it was like being performed, maybe through recordings, maybe sort of like a finding the source people. I think they were able to capture a stylistic perfection, I would say, that was really impressive in the recordings.
And would you say that the specific balance between rules and improvisation also differs by region?
Oh, absolutely. Region also, maybe from performer to performer, maybe a school performance. I think, you know, there's a lot to do still to really work on these issues.
Thank you. Yeah, Ted, could you tell us a little bit about the responses the Aga Khan Music Program encountered in these regions by the different governments, but also by the general public? How did they respond to these initiatives to revitalize the musical traditions?
We've really had terrific cooperation from the governments in the countries where we work. We've been working steadily in Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan since 2000. We worked in Kazakhstan for quite a few years. We built a program there that was ultimately taken over by their Ministry of Education, and they nationalized it, and they're now supplying the instruments, the textbooks, and all of that. So that was quite a success. We started working in Uzbekistan, but we had to shut down because the Karimov government didn't want us, nor did they want any other NGOs.
I see.
So now, of course, there's a new government, and we'll see. We'd like to go back in there. It's a wonderful place for music, needless to say. We've never worked in Turkmenistan, and it doesn't look like we will be able to do that anytime soon.
No,
we
right.
have worked with some Turkmen musicians. But anyway, in the countries where we've had the strongest and most continuous presence, which is Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, where the Aga Khan Development Network is also very active in both of those countries. There's a lot of work that goes on besides music in social development, in economic development, in health and education. They're doing just terrific work in those countries. So our music work is really part of that. And this is really part of the belief, the core belief of His Highness, the Aga Khan, that development needs to work simultaneously along three fronts, in economic development, social development, and cultural development. So our piece is really bound up with those other domains. And that's why I think it works.
Right, and can you say something as well about the response of the general public?
Well, the response of the public has been just terrific. We've made this music cool again, if you will. There was a time, again, in the Soviet era, people didn't play these kinds of instruments. They played accordions. They played the piano. They didn't walk around. It wasn't cool to walk around Bishkek with a Komodos case on your back. Now it is. Yeah. I was just Zooming the other day with a young friend of mine in Bishkek. He's a terrific young musician, extremely creative, imaginative. And he was telling me he's invented, well, he thinks he's invented, a new genre called folk and roll, like rock and roll, but it's folk and roll. So he's combining Kyrgyz folk music with rock and roll. And he sent me a little MP3 of a piece he'd written, which is indeed exactly that. It's folk and roll. I thought it was very imaginative. So, this is nice. I think, how we measure our success, that kids like that are finding creative stimulation to try to have a life in music. It's very hard to do in Central Asia. It's hard to do anywhere. No one really, despite the fact that our musical culture here is sort of, it's oriented towards celebrity. But as everyone knows, most musicians are not celebrities. Most musicians are not wealthy. It takes courage to be a musician here, and even more so in Central Asia.
And living traditions need to be adopted and need to be revitalized all the time. So that's great to hear. Let me maybe, with an eye on the time, conclude with a question for both of you. Obviously, these musical traditions transcend national borders, but I assume you have to work within national contexts to organize the revitalization. How does that work? Are national contexts at this point sometimes limiting, or is there a general feeling that this is a broader region and that cultural boundaries are not that important?
Well, I'll just jump in speaking for our program. We're very much involved in interregional, trying to stimulate interregional musical collaboration. We have wonderful support from the government of Norway through their Ministry of Foreign Affairs to do exactly this, to try to bring musics from some of these countries together, musicians, because music has always been stimulated. Creativity, artistic creativity has always been stimulated by cross-cultural contact. That's the story of the Silk Road, basically. Yeah. We've been doing for many years workshops and master classes where we invite musicians from Central Asia to meet with musicians from the Middle East and North Africa that are, in a sense, kindred traditions. They were historically linked, but those links were broken. And we're putting them back together, and the results have been really very encouraging.
Yeah, that's amazing. Munir, any concluding thoughts from you?
I think this is extremely exciting. Like really, I think when we are bringing creative people into a room, you know, whether it is a virtual room or a physical room, I think something will come out. And I think at the beginning, when our earlier speaker mentioned about East meets East, I think it doesn't matter, you know, how we label what meets with what. I think eventually the result is going to be something unique, something really, you know, worth of listening. And when we make those things available to the world, I think, you know, somebody is going to develop a taste for it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, both Ted and Munir, for a very enjoyable conversation after a magnificent program. And for the viewers, thank you so much for joining us. And I hope you all have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.